I am Emily, 30 years old, just arrived in my hometown in the Chicago suburbs after 3 years away to attend my father's 65th birthday party. Despite the many ups and downs in my family's past, I still carry with me a strong desire to hug each familiar face again, especially my sister Sarah. As children, we were inseparable, growing up together in memories filled with laughter and whispers on the pillow. But time passed. Adulthood, like a rushing river, swept us apart. The simmering misunderstandings turned into cracks, leaving our sisterhood now only a shadow of tension and indifference. Even so, I still believed, or at least wanted to believe, that this special occasion would be an opportunity for us to mend. But unexpectedly, in what seemed to be the warmest moment, a cold gesture from Sarah in front of everyone shattered that fragile trust mercilessly. Before I share everything that happened that night, let me know what state you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, please share it. My journey of learning to stand up for myself, facing old wounds after years of being pushed aside, might be your journey too. Growing up in Elmhurst, a quiet suburb west of Chicago, our neighborhood was a picture of peacefulness, with rows of rustling oaks and neat houses that were always blooming with flowers in every season. My childhood was a series of warm memories: blanket picnics on the lawn, spirited baseball games in the backyard, and evenings around the chessboard, where Sarah and I formed a strategic alliance to defeat our parents. My siblings were inseparable. Sarah, 4 years older than me, was my first dedicated mentor. From how to tie my shoelaces without them coming loose to how to apply lipstick to make me look grown up for school plays. I admired her completely, and I seemed to be an adorable, indispensable little sister to her. We weren't rich, but we never felt deprived. Dad was a civil engineer. Mom ran a cozy little bakery in the heart of the neighborhood. On weekends, we biked around the local park, or when the weather was kind, drove to Lake Michigan to enjoy the salty breeze and sunshine. Everything was calm and predictable, a simple peace that I thought would last forever. Until the summer I turned 15. The arguments started out as hushed whispers behind closed doors, which Sarah and I tried to ignore as if we didn't hear them. But soon they grew louder and more frequent. More intense, more frequent, and impossible to ignore. Dad started sleeping on the living room sofa every night. Mom went from a few sips of beer in the evenings to drinking before meals, then even on sunny afternoons. In the midst of the family chaos, Sarah and I were like two people trying to steer a broken ship, holding hands in vain, exchanging words of encouragement that we both knew were empty. When the matter was finally finalized in divorce papers, I felt stunned and strangely relieved. Dad moved into a small apartment on the west side of the city, and our house, which had been filled with so much laughter, was suddenly suffocatingly empty. I was 15 and Sarah was 19, and that was when the first cracks in our relationship began to show. I tried to keep in touch with both of us, as if to patch up the broken pieces, but Sarah chose to stand firmly on her mother's side. In her eyes at that time, with all her immature emotions, her father was the only one responsible for the family's breakdown. Things really took a turn 2 years later, when Dad started dating Diane. She brought a calm warmth, a gentle smile, and tried to approach us genuinely, bringing boxes of homemade brownies every weekend and asking about our favorite things without forcing it. I sensed her kindness and appreciated the effort, but Sarah didn't. She rejected Diane coldly, almost with hostility. "She's just trying to replace me," she said, her lips pressed together, her voice laced with contempt and raw hurt. Dad and I tried many times to explain that no one replaces anyone, that everyone deserves a chance, but Sarah wouldn't budge. When Dad and Diane had a small wedding at the town hall, I went quietly alone. Sarah refused to attend, and what hurt me more was that Mom seemed to support the objection. That moment carved a deep chasm between me and her, a subtle but palpable distance that over the years only widened. As I began to open up, slowly building a relationship with Diane with reserve but sincerity, Sarah retreated further, as if every friendly gesture on her part were a betrayal. Gradually, Sarah became, as family therapists would say, Mom's favorite child. Mom not only understood, but also implicitly supported Sarah's resentment toward Dad and toward me. simply because I stayed in touch with him. Innuendos began to creep into everyday conversations, light as air but sharp enough to cut. At least one of you values family. Or, Sarah understands the value of loyalty. Each time, a part of me retreated, allowing the distance between us to grow. When I left Elmhurst for college in Boston, Sarah and I almost stopped talking. She stayed home, attended a nearby public school, and moved in with her boyfriend, Ethan, in an apartment just blocks from Mom's. As for me, I went into college with a hunger for freedom, to meet new people, to immerse myself in photography projects, and to feel like I was living for myself for the first time. The distance wasn't just measured in miles. It was also an excuse to put aside all the growing cracks that I hadn't had the courage to face. After graduation, I started an entry-level job at a small photography studio in Seattle. The pay was modest, the hours irregular, but it was the first window into the world I dreamed of entering. The trips back to Elmhurst became less frequent. Some years it was just a short Labor Day weekend. Other years it was a few days around Independence Day. I still called my dad late at night, just to hear his voice for a few minutes before falling asleep, and occasionally texted my mom. But with Sarah, the connection was mostly through cold text messages in a family chat group or a flat, emotionless birthday wish, and 8 years passed like that, quietly and steadily. Sarah married Ethan, had 2 children I knew only from pictures, and quickly became the coordination center for ceremonies, family dinners, and gatherings to which I was less and less willing to be invited. As for me, I kept going, growing stronger by the minute. I moved into a small, bright, modern apartment in Portland, a place where I was surrounded by close friends who had become my adopted family. And amid all the changes, a distance between Sarah and I seemed to have formed, silently but firmly, as if there was no way back. A surprise call from my dad pulled me out of my daily routine. His 65th birthday was approaching, and Sarah, who had always been the family's coordinator, had planned a celebration at a favorite diner in Elmhurst. "I'd love for you to be there," he said, his voice ringing with hope but also with a weariness that made my chest tighten. "Everyone's coming. Mom, Diane, the rest of the family. It's been a long time, honey." As 3 years, a seemingly short time filled with so much unspoken, had passed since I'd last been home. 3 years of broken promises of visits, swallowed up by photo shoots, retouching, and deadlines. 3 years of video calls with Dad and Diane, but the images on the screen couldn't fill the void. 3 birthdays, 3 holidays, countless family dinners that had quietly passed without me. "I'm coming back, Dad," I said, opening my laptop and searching for flights with a soft but firm determination. Nothing's stopping me this time. That night, I couldn't sleep. In the silence, I thought about Sarah. Would she open her heart to me? Would time soften the resentment that had been simmering, or would this return only deepen the distance between us? Despite my doubts, I held on to a glimmer of hope that this special anniversary might be the beginning of our reconciliation. I booked my ticket with mixed feelings, excited and nervous. After 8 years of keeping a safe distance from family turmoil, this time I was coming back of my own free will. For Dad. For myself. I thought I was prepared for the cold stares and awkward conversations. Little did I know they would be the most pleasant part of what lay ahead. The flight from Seattle to Chicago always made me uneasy in a way I couldn't name. Not because of altitude or turbulence, but because each mile brought me closer to the tangled web of relationships I'd spent years trying to avoid by building a life for myself in Portland. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, I gripped the armrests, closed my eyes, and tried to push the anxiety aside and cling to the good memories that had existed. And strangely enough, they came back naturally. I remembered summer afternoons when Sarah taught me to graffiti the old wooden fence behind our house with crayons. I remembered the times we'd danced to Destiny's Child hits in our living room, confident as if the whole world were our audience. Sarah had been my protector from the teasing neighborhood kids. I was 8. She was 12. "No one bullies my sister," she said, her voice hard and her eyes fierce as she stood before me like a wall. What made her change? Since when did resentment quietly replace love? That question kept repeating in my head, while white clouds drifted past the small oval window beside the seat, like a slow-motion film of things that were no longer intact. 3 hours later, I walked into the arrivals area of O'Hare International Airport. The terminal had been updated since my last visit, but it still felt strangely familiar. The smell of toast from a nearby coffee shop mingled with the lingering scent of floor cleaner from an early shift, while soft announcements blared over the PA system, slowing the air. Dad had offered to pick me up, but I insisted on renting a car. Freedom brought a sense of control, and control made me feel safer, if only in an illusion. The first shreds of hope were dashed when I called my mother to let her know I'd arrived. Her voice was soft, but there was something distant about it as she explained that there was no room for me. Sarah and the kids are taking over the family room. They're remodeling the kitchen, she said, as if it made perfect sense. You know we're small. There's only 3 bedrooms. She'd booked me a room at a Holiday Inn near the freeway. I nodded silently, swallowing the self-pity that was rising. This would be my base for the next 3 days. Not quite a home, not quite a hotel. Just a neutral stop in a relationship that was no longer as comfortable as it once was. After checking in and dropping my suitcase off in a corner, I drove into downtown Elmhurst to find a truly meaningful birthday present for Dad. The Oak Street Antiques store was still there, nestled between an old donut shop and a pet store with a faded sign. 2 months earlier, during a brief Friday night phone call, Dad had excitedly mentioned that he'd just seen an old movie and had been drawn to a vintage Hamilton khaki field watch, like the one Steve McQueen used to wear. He'd said with a rare, innocent excitement. But these were collectibles now, and the prices were beyond what I could easily afford. After weeks of research, negotiation, and a good chunk of my savings, I found a similar model in excellent condition. The seller had inspected it and promised to hold it until I could pick it up. As the small box was placed in my hands, I felt the weight of it, as if it contained all the silent hopes of mending something that had long been loose. It was more than a gift. It was a message that I still cared, still understood my father, still quietly followed the things that fascinated him. We arranged to meet the next morning at a new coffee shop before the party. The old diner that had served pancakes every Sunday morning was now an industrial-style cafe with rough concrete walls and hanging orange-yellow incandescent lights. Dad was there, sitting in the familiar pose but looking older than I remembered. His hair was mostly gray and the lines around his eyes were deeper and more pronounced, but his smile was the same. Warm, gentle, crinkling the corners of his eyes as it had been years ago. "Here's your daughter," he said, standing up and pulling me into his arms. I could smell the lingering coffee on his jacket, mixed with the familiar scent of shaving cream. For a moment, I was 9 years old again. Small, trusting, and at peace in the arms of the person who had once been my whole world. We sat at a table by the window, sipping filter coffee that Dad complained was too much trouble, but confessed was surprisingly good. The early morning sunlight slanted through the glass, glinting off his silver hair as he told me about his recent promotion to project manager, a step he said he hadn't expected to make. He talked about the new herb garden Diane was tending in the backyard, which smelled of mint and basil in the afternoons. Then he talked about his plans for a gradual retirement, not a stoppage, but a step back to observe life more slowly. I shared a few things, too, about my new title as assistant art director, about a series I was working on of cinematic urban landscapes, which I hoped would be the first step toward doing something of my own. When I asked cautiously about Sarah, Dad's expression softened into a small, tired smile. "She put her heart and soul into this," he said. "You know, Sarah loves planning. The kids grow up so fast. Liam's going into 1st grade, and Emma can sing nursery rhymes now." I nodded, trying to picture the 2 little ones I'd seen only in a few 4th of July cards, a few scattered Instagram moments. A dull ache crept into my chest as I realized how long I'd been absent from their early years. "Sarah's been dying to see you," Dad added, but his voice paused for a beat, as if choosing words that wouldn't hurt. "We all have. It's been a long time." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe it wasn't polite. "I miss you," I said, and I knew I meant it. It was more than the softness of my voice suggested. "I'm sorry work took me so far." Dad squeezed my hand, his palm calloused and warm. "You've made a life for yourself," he said. "We're proud of you." though we wish we could see you more often. Afterward, we took a walk around Elmhurst Central Park. The early morning air smelled of freshly cut grass. Dad pointed out the changes. A new ice cream shop next to the old bakery, the renovated town library, and the old movie theater where I'd seen the first showing of The Sound of Music, now a warm, yellow-lit concert hall. The sense of familiarity and relief made me cautiously optimistic that the party might be the next step to something better. When I got back to the hotel, I found a text from Sarah. It was brief, listing the details of the dinner. Reservations for 6 p.m., dress code, parking available next door. No greeting. No sign of welcome. I typed out 4 different responses and deleted them all. Finally, I left a note. Thanks, looking forward to it. That evening, I got dressed. A blue midi dress, a muted color, but not dull, with silver sandals and tiny moonstone earrings. Just enough to say I was fine, but not so much that I would stand out. Every detail was calculated, as if I were walking into an important meeting rather than a family party. In the bathroom mirror, I practiced my conversation with Sarah. The kids are so big. They look lovely. The way you organized the party was great. The words were easy, neutral, unprovoked. I smiled until it looked natural, as if it had never been practiced. I tried to ignore the nervousness that curled in my stomach, a quiet fear that I was back to being that 15-year-old girl who walked into the living room with bad posture. Tomorrow will be different, I told myself. Maybe tomorrow would be a start, a small bridge across the years of estrangement between Sarah and me. At least we could be nice for Dad. It was just dinner. How bad could it be? The Riverfront Bistro stands out in downtown Elmhurst like a classic gem in a modern city. The facade is clad in elegant gray stone, and soft yellow lights cast on the granite steps. Through tall windows draped in soft silk curtains, light from chandeliers warms the interior, where crisp white tablecloths stand out against polished mahogany chairs. Sarah chose the perfect location. Elegant yet understated, just the way her father likes it. I arrived 15 minutes early, a habit from years working in a photography studio where punctuality means late. The young receptionist with her hair neatly tied and her perfect smile checks the reservations. David's party? You're the first one in. Want to wait at the bar? I nod and order a Merlot, my hand shaking as I raise it. My eyes don't leave the door as my family slowly enters. Uncle Michael and Aunt Ellen arrived first. Dad's brother, accompanied by his warm wife, their eyes lit up when they saw me. Emily! Aunt Ellen pulled me into a perfumed embrace, and Uncle Michael laughed, lifting me off the ground. There's my adventurous niece. How's Portland taking care of you? I smiled, feeling my defenses soften. We talked about the new RV they were using to travel through national parks this summer. Then came my cousins Lisa and Mark, with their new girlfriends. Then came Aunt Susan from Milwaukee and Uncle Paul, Mom's brother, with his wife Nancy. Each hug, each caring question made me feel like I was never truly forgotten. Diane, my father's second wife, arrived next. She wore a simple pale gray dress that accentuated her neatly curled silver hair. Her embrace was gentle and affectionate. Your father will be so happy to see you, she whispered, her voice warm as the morning dew. You are the best gift tonight. In that moment, I understood why I had chosen Diane as my family, and why Sarah had not. The air changed slightly as Mom walked in. She was wearing a pale blue dress, her hair curled and freshly done. When she saw me next to Diane, she was stunned for a moment, then smiled, a polite smile. Emily, you're here. Mom opened her arms to hug me, a brief but not cold hug. This city suits you. You look fine. I nodded. Me too. There was an awkward pause before Mom said, Sarah will be a little late. Ethan is on the phone and the kids always take longer than expected. I nodded, not knowing how to respond without feeling awkward. Other members continued to arrive, filling the room with chatter, introductions, and hugs. 20 minutes later, the door opened again. Sarah walked in with her small family. 8 years in Portland had sharpened my eyes. I recognized the changes immediately. Her hair was now dark brown with highlights. She carried a designer bag worth my monthly salary, and she walked confidently, the kind of person who knows her place. Ethan followed, leading his bright-eyed 6-year-old son, Liam, and Emma, the curly-haired girl clutching a stuffed bear. Sarah moved through the crowd, hugging her mother, greeting relatives. Her eyes swept over me without stopping. Only when she had finished her formalities with the adults did she turn to me, a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Emily, you're really coming," she said, her voice tinged with surprise, as if she'd bet I wouldn't come. "I can't miss Dad's birthday," I said softly. "It's so nice to see you again." Sarah leaned in to hug me, quickly and casually, then immediately bent down to straighten Emma's dress. "Say hello to Aunt Emily, kids," she said, her voice hollow. Liam waved shyly, and Emma nestled deeper into her mother's legs. I knelt down, trying to smile as gently as I could. "I'm glad to see you. Last time I saw you, Liam was just learning to walk. Emma was so little." "You're 6 now," Liam said proudly. "And you can read." "That's great. Can I read to you later?" But before he could say anything else, Sarah interrupted. "Let's go find Dad. He's probably waiting." Dad appeared just then. He looked surprised to see such a large and well-organized party. Sarah had clearly kept it a secret. Dad's face lit up as the birthday wishes rang out. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. His look of happiness and relief told me I had made the right choice. Diane raised her glass first. "To David, a devoted husband, a wonderful father, a loving grandfather, and the most patient man I have ever known. Happy 65th. The clink of champagne glasses mingled with applause. Dad smiled broadly, one arm around Diane, the other holding my hand. In that moment, I felt at peace. The receptionist returned and ushered us into the private banquet room. We walked through the main area to a private room with dark wood walls, deep blue carpeting, and a long, meticulously laid table. Purple and white flowers, Dad's favorite colors, were interspersed with framed family photos that Sarah must have carefully selected. My heart sank when I realized that none of them included me. People began to find their seats. I walked to the main table, holding the gift box, a watch my father had wanted, under my arm. And then Sarah stopped me. She was still smiling, but her eyes had changed, sharp and determined. "Excuse me," she said quietly enough for a few people to hear. "This table is reserved for immediate family." She gestured to a small table near the door where a sign read "Additional Guests." The room wasn't completely silent, but the chatter slowed. Eyes began to turn toward us. My cheeks burned. It wasn't just a refusal to take a seat. It was a public, subtle, stinging blow. Time seemed to stand still. The clink of knives and forks on plates, the soft chatter, the soft jazz from the ceiling speakers, everything faded beneath the heavy ringing in my ears. Everything felt like it was receding, replaced by this moment. Hard, sharp, and inevitable. Dad looked up from his conversation with Michael, his eyes flickering with confusion as he took in the scene before him. "Sarah, what's going on?" he asked, his voice not exactly harsh, but incomprehensible. Sarah kept her forced smile, the kind she'd practiced at parent-teacher conferences and community events. "Just helping Emily find a seat," she said. "The room's a little small, so I split it up. The main family table and the side table." Her voice was even, surprisingly calm. Mom's lips twitched, a smile that faded before she could regain her neutral expression. Diane, who was standing near Dad, put her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I don't understand," I muttered, my hands tightening around the gift box, the watch my father had mentioned so many times as a small wish. My hands were shaking, as if it were the last thread connecting me to what was left of my family. Sarah tilted her head, leaned in close, and whispered just enough for me to hear. 3 years is too long, Emily. No visits, no calls. Gradually, people stop being family, just a distant blood connection." Each word fell like a stone against my chest. I turned my head, looking at the side table where Carol, Dad's old coworker, sat with her husband Tom and a distant relative from Wisconsin and their teenage son. Not immediate family, not blood, Not me. Ethan stood beside Sarah, saying nothing, his eyes staring into space, avoiding my gaze. Liam and Emma stood close to their mother, their faces bewildered, feeling a tension they were too young to understand. Sarah, that's enough, Dad finally said. But his voice lacked the necessary firmness, as if held back by the love he felt for both girls. There's room at this table. Sarah shook her head slightly, her voice small but firm. Dad, I've made arrangements for everyone. The food is ready, the seating is set. Changing it now would throw everything into disarray. It sounded logical, even thoughtful, but the logic only made the decision more bitter. There was no coincidence. Sarah had planned to exclude me. It's okay, I heard myself say. The words came out as a light breeze, but inside my heart was screaming. I don't want to ruin the plan. I walked toward the side table, passing glances, some surprised, some averted. I caught Diane's guilty gaze and nodded, as if to reassure her. As for Mom, she looked away, her lips pressed together. Each step I took seemed to carry weight, as if I were slowly and deliberately stepping away from a blood relationship. As I approached the table, Carol's husband, Tom, pulled up a chair next to me, patting the armrest with a sympathetic gesture. Sit here, girl. I've never met you, but I've heard a lot about David's youngest daughter. His voice was warm and genuine. No formality, no pity. I almost cried at the unexpected kindness. I sat down, carefully placing the gift box under my chair, forcing a smile that I wasn't sure was real. Thank you. It was nice meeting you. During the appetizers, I made polite conversation with a few of my table mates, but my ears kept picking up the laughter and lively conversations coming from the main table, just a few feet away. Mom leaned over to hand Emma a piece of bread, breaking it in half. Dad said something that made the whole table laugh, and Sarah, as if playing the role of spotlight controller, still glanced at me from time to time, a look soft enough to be unnoticeable, but clearly warning. Where was I and where should I stay? The seemingly small distance between our tables became an odd boundary, as if I were standing outside a thick pane of glass, looking at my family, seeing every gesture, every expression, but completely excluded from the action. When the waiter came to take the order, he started at the head table, as if inadvertently reinforcing the order of precedence that had been implicitly established. Dad, in a valiant attempt, suggested that everyone raise their glasses in the middle of the room, sharing some memorable stories. But Sarah cut him off tactfully. Keep it light, Dad. Too formal and the kids will get bored. It was a light remark, but enough to sweep away any hopes of connection. The main course arrived. I cut into the steak, the sauce was well dressed, but the flavor was muted, as if reflecting the emotions I was feeling. Across the room, Sarah navigated the conversation smoothly, playing the role of perfect hostess. But I sensed clearly that her fluency was not just to maintain the atmosphere, but also to keep me on the sidelines, like an uninvited guest. The presentation of the gifts weighed the most heavily on me. Sarah made it clear. Close family would present first, then everyone else. Mom handed Dad an exquisite leather wallet. Sarah and Ethan presented him with the pair of concert tickets Dad had mentioned. Diane tenderly handed him an old photo book of old Chicago. When it was my turn, I stepped forward, holding the small box. A vague sense of dread washed over me. The gift that had once made me proud now made me feel foolish. Happy birthday, Dad, I said, keeping my voice from shaking. Dad opened the box. For a moment, the room seemed to fall silent. Dad's eyes lit up with surprise. Emily, what is this? He lifted the Hamilton khaki field watch, his eyes focused on the dial. The one I mentioned, it's exactly like the model Steve McQueen wore. He immediately took off the old watch and put on the new one, his fingers trembling slightly with excitement. How did you find it? Before I could reply, Sarah interrupted, her voice as gentle as ever. We should probably serve the cake before the kids get tired. The watch box was set aside, stacked with the other opened presents. That rare moment of connection, so brief, so fragile, was mercilessly cut off. On my way back to the waitress, I quietly avoided eye contact. Sarah walked past, not stopping, just whispering like a knife, soft and precise. Trying to bribe your way back? There are some things money can't buy. The sarcasm coming from someone carrying the latest Chanel bag almost made me laugh if it didn't hurt so much. As the party progressed, it became a dull loop. Every opportunity for connection was subtly stifled. Distance was maintained with careful calculation. My presence remained just a silent shadow, blown by the wind. No one bothered to look back. By the time dessert arrived, I couldn't hold it in any longer. The tears welled up, choking me as if my chest were about to burst. I needed to get away from Sarah's smug smile and the concerned looks of my relatives, who knew what was going on but chose to stay silent. "Sorry, I'll be right back," I mumbled to the waitress, gently placing a napkin beside the untouched tiramisu. The bathroom became an unlikely refuge. Cold granite countertops, dim lighting, all strangely quiet, a stark contrast to the emotional storm I'd just left. I locked myself in the back stall, letting the tears flow like a broken river. My shoulders shook with each sob, and I tried to cover my mouth with the tissue to keep from making a sound. How did this happen? The question replayed in my mind, pulling at the chain of memories that had been repressed. Sarah hadn't come to my graduation because Dad and Diane were there. She didn't invite me to her wedding, but sent invitations to distant relatives we barely spoke to. When Liam and Emma were born, I didn't get the news until a few weeks after everyone else. It wasn't a surprise. It was just the first time she'd made her exclusion so public. Realizing that didn't make it any less painful, but it did put it in perspective. This wasn't just one awkward night. It was 8 years of being excluded. 8 years of Sarah portraying herself as the dutiful daughter, while making me out to be the quitter, the deserter. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia, my best friend in Portland. "How was the family party? Did you hold up?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, hesitating. How could I tell her that my sister had deliberately placed me at the back table as a declaration that I was no longer part of the family? That my dad, who should have stepped up, was too afraid of confrontation to do anything else? That my mom had pursed her lips as if her silence were a form of consent? Finally, I typed, "So boring. Sarah put me at a separate table, no one I know." Mia responded almost immediately. "What? Are you kidding? That's the height of passive aggressiveness. Want me to fake an emergency call so you can leave?" The thought was appealing. I could leave now, go back to my hotel, book an early flight back to Portland, return to the safety of my life, where family drama was kept at a comfortable distance. But then I wondered, what had 8 years of hiding done? I thought back to Dr. Harper, the therapist I'd seen after the stressful 4th of July holiday 2 years ago. "Sometimes we isolate ourselves," she'd said, her voice soft but not without truth. "We continue to play the roles we've been written for, because breaking the script seems too dangerous. So what was my role? The daughter away from home, the career woman, the one who chose to leave? And if that was the case, wasn't my sitting at that side table without saying a word aiding the script Sarah had created? Worse still, what message was I sending on my father's birthday? The man I still loved despite everything. That I was okay with this treatment, that I had no place here? Another message from Mia interrupted my thoughts. "Whatever you decide, remember, you deserve respect. Don't let them make you feel small." She was right. No matter how messy my history with Sarah was, I was still a human being, a person with feelings, with values, and who deserved to be treated with the bare minimum of kindness. And Dad, who was turning a year older, sitting among his loved ones, deserved to have both of his daughters present in a space that wasn't toxic, not bitter, not divided by old stereotypes that should have been changed long ago. I stood up, wiped my eyes, and took a deep breath. In the bathroom mirror, the smudged mascara was still there, a sign of the damage that had not yet dried. But the reflection in my gaze was something else, a newly ignited determination. I slowly adjusted my makeup, reapplied my lipstick, and held my head high as if to remind myself that I was no longer the woman who had resignedly entered this room earlier. The one who had quietly settled into the side table chair, meekly accepting her assignment, and would not return. The one standing here was Emily, a woman who had learned to draw boundaries, no longer stuck in the marginal role imposed on her or others. I returned to the banquet hall, walking slowly, my eyes no longer averted. Everything was still in place, but I was different. Dad sat in the middle of the main table, Mom on one side, Diane on the other. A living picture of the silent separation that had lasted too many years. Sarah, with her charming smile and her coordinating voice, sat near the head of the table, directing the conversation as if directing a play in which all the characters were unconsciously playing their part. The air was still noisy, the clinking of glasses, the laughter, but Dad's eyes still glanced at my empty seat from time to time. A silent glance that I knew was not without meaning. His smile was not genuine. His eyes were full of unspoken words. This was supposed to be his night. A birthday party to celebrate, to be the center of the family. But once again, it had become Sarah's stage for controlling and orchestrating. And I, by remaining silent, by withdrawing, had not only hurt myself, but also allowed what should have been a perfect evening to be tainted by unnecessary distractions. Dessert was served, coffee was poured, a sign that the evening was coming to an end. If ever there was a time to change the subject, it was now. My heart was pounding, blood pounding in my ears as I weighed each word, strong enough to tell the truth, but not to embarrass my father. I took a deep breath, pushed away my fear, and decided this would end tonight. I waited until the waiter finished pouring the coffee, letting the conversation naturally fall into a lull. Then I stood up from the side table, coffee cup in hand. My voice rang out, more firmly than I expected. I would like to raise a glass to toast to Dad. The room seemed to pause for a brief moment. Heads turned, voices stopped, and I felt the weight of all eyes on me. Sarah paused, her smile frozen as I stepped forward to stand between the tables, between my old comfort zone and my new truth, resisting the temptation to return to my designated corner. For those who don't know, I'm Emily, David's youngest daughter. I looked at my father, smiling at him with all the sincerity I could muster in a heart that had just found its own voice. He looked at me, surprised, but also as if he was listening with all his heart. I'm sorry I haven't been home in a while. Portland and work have kept me busy, but I've never been too busy to love my family, even from afar. I paused, took a sip of coffee to steady myself, and swallowed the tremor in my voice. You taught me a lot of things, but perhaps the most important thing is to live with integrity, to stand up for what is right even when it is not easy. Tonight, I want to put that lesson into practice. Sarah stirred visibly, her mother's eyes looking far away as if withdrawing from the present. Diane, the woman sitting quietly beside her father, gently placed her hand on his. She said nothing, but the touch was a word of support. Family isn't about distance or visits. It's not about who throws parties or who lives closer. I looked straight at Sarah. And it's definitely not about who sits at which table. A wave of tension rippled through the room, and several relatives glanced at Sarah and me, beginning to sense that something had been brewing for a long time. For too long, I've let distance define my place, I said, my voice low but firm. I used to believe that I deserved to be considered an outsider just because I lived in Portland, because I wasn't on the phone or at the meetings. But tonight, I refuse to be that person. I turned to my father. His eyes were filled with barely concealed emotion. Dad, I didn't come back just to celebrate your birthday. I came back to tell you that I love you, that I'll always be your daughter, not a visitor from afar. Sarah started to speak, but Michael spoke first. Emily's right, he said, his voice low and steady, echoing through the room. This table setting has never made me feel comfortable. We're all family. Diane nodded, her face serious. I feel the same way. I should have said something a long time ago. Sarah blushed. There's limited room. I'm just trying to make it work. Sarah, I know it's important to you, but I can't accept this role anymore, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and non-aggressive. Mom cut in, her voice hard. It's my dad's birthday. We should be focusing on celebrating him, not creating tension. That's why, I said softly, tonight should be about him, Not about divisions, distances, and old hierarchies. I just want us to be together as a family. Dad finally spoke. Sarah, was this your idea? The question wasn't accusatory, but it was heavy. Sarah paused. Restaurants need a certain number of tables. I think it's appropriate to have people who are close to each other. And Emily isn't close? Dad asked, his voice low but firm enough that no one in the room could ignore it. Sarah ducked her head. That's not what I meant. It's just that Emily lives far away and doesn't participate much in family life. Susan lives all the way in Milwaukee, and she sits at the main table, Dad said. Not angry, but clear. There was a pause. Then unexpectedly, Ethan, the quiet brother-in-law, spoke up. Sarah, I told you. This is going to mess things up. Sarah turned around, her pain evident at being publicly disapproved of. Two of them began whispering nervously while the others tried to pretend they didn't hear. But the thin veneer of silence began to crack. A few relatives exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "Remember the 4th of July party?" Emily wasn't invited. Another nodded. What about that family photo when she went to the bathroom? Group texts I never got. Parties I only found out about at the last minute. Aunt Ellen rose from the side table, her voice clear. David, I think what Emily is saying is, it's time for this family to heal. And it can start tonight if we accept each other as equals, no matter where we live. Cousin Mark nodded vigorously. Remember Labor Day? Sarah said Emily was busy, but it turns out she didn't know until the last minute. Once the truth was exposed, the pattern of exclusion could no longer be denied. The fragments of memory became a powerful stream. Someone told of my forgotten birthday. Another recalled a reunion that had been called too late. Each story, each whisper, was a piece of the puzzle that confirmed that this was no accident, but a deliberate habit, long-lasting, insidious, and damaging. Sarah's already fragile composure began to crack as she sensed the tide of agreement shifting in my direction. She struggled to hold on to the last argument she had left. I'm the keeper of this family, Sarah said, trying to sound calm but still unable to hide her irritation. I plan the parties, I remember birthdays, I make sure Liam and Emma are close to their grandparents. And what about Emily? She's gone off to make a life in Portland and only shows up occasionally. I looked at Sarah, not angrily, just with a sincerity that had nothing to hide. Sarah, I said softly, you think I don't care? But I miss home more than you do. I call Dad every week. I send cards, I send gifts. I love this family in my own way. The difference is, I've never punished you for your choices. The words swept through the room like a silent breeze, touching everyone watching the confrontation. The eyes that followed Sarah began to change. No longer full of support, but mixed with hesitation, even understanding. In that moment, Sarah's expression dropped. From anger to confusion, then a moment of hesitation, as if she had just seen a part of the truth she had been trying to avoid. My father stood, not raising his voice, but his presence was enough to silence the room. His voice was deep and steady, the kind of sound honed over decades of being a director, without needing to be ostentatious to make everyone listen. That's enough, he said. Emily, come sit with me. There's always a place for you in this family, no matter what others have arranged. Without waiting for another word, Uncle Michael stood up, pulled out an empty chair, and placed it next to Dad. With a simple gesture, the situation had changed. There we go, he said as if closing the tension. Now let's enjoy the rest of our birthday party. I walked over and sat down in the new chair, feeling pulled back into something that had always been mine. Under the table, Diane squeezed my hand, her grip quiet and supportive. Across the table, Sarah kept her forced smile, but the white knuckles around her water glass showed that she was trying to hold on to her composure. Mom looked at me, her eyes unmistakably tense, but she said nothing more. The silence was probably the only concession I could get from her that night. The party continued. The cake was brought out. Birthday wishes were given, and the mood slowly calmed down after the storm. Conversations began again, this time without the hesitation of before. As the party began to wind down, a few relatives approached me. Not through Sarah, not with distant pleasantries, but with genuine words. "It's so good to see you. Can I have your number? Let's not just communicate through Sarah anymore." Aunt Ellen asked me how Portland was, and Mark said he wanted to bring his wife and kids to visit me during the holidays. The sincere invitations, the warm handshakes, all of it reminded me I was no longer an outsider. I was slowly finding my place in this family, without asking permission, without needing validation. As the guests filed out, Dad put his hand on my shoulder, holding me back. "We need to talk," he said softly, his voice warm and serious. "Meet me tomorrow on the park bench, by the fish pond." I nodded. I understood that this was not a simple invitation, but the beginning of something that had been long overdue. A conversation between father and daughter, without Mom, without Sarah, without Diane's passive kindness. Just us, and things that had been dormant for too long. Sarah walked out, the kids trailing behind her, Ethan silent, no hugs, no kind goodbyes. But as she passed me, our eyes met, and for the first time in years, I saw something else. Not just anger or contempt, but genuine confusion, as if she had lost her script and didn't know how to react when I refused to play the supporting role. Strangely, I didn't feel guilty, didn't feel small. Whatever lay ahead, I was on my own 2 feet today. The fish pond in Elmhurst Park reminds me of my childhood days. Cool mornings when my dad and I threw breadcrumbs into the water, watching the fish scramble to the surface. The first time we learned how to throw pebbles, so they skimmed the surface. Simple picnics with a pot of cold tea made by my mother. This morning, the air was filled with the scent of autumn, the smell of damp leaves and a light breeze. I saw my dad sitting on his usual bench, 2 paper cups of coffee next to him. "Black coffee, a little sugar," he said, handing me one, his eyes warm. "Still your taste, right?" A seemingly small detail, but it made my heart suddenly stir. Some things, no matter how many years passed, never changed. "Maybe," I said, smiling, and sat down next to him. We sat there, watching the water ripple, the goldfish swimming in clusters, quietly enjoying the moment without words. Then Dad spoke, his voice a little choked. "I owe you an apology, Emily. A real apology." I started to speak, but Dad held up a hand. "Let me finish." He looked into his coffee, his eyes deep in memory. "I knew Sarah had been cutting you out of family life for a long time. I saw it, but I comforted myself by thinking she was just trying to protect what was left of the divorce, that everything would be okay. I was afraid of confrontation, afraid of making things worse, so I kept quiet. But that silence hurt you." He shook his head sadly. "Last night made it all so clear. The separate dining table? I didn't ask for it specifically, but I didn't stop her. And it wasn't the first time. She forgot to invite you to Labor Day. She scheduled a family photo shoot when you were only coming over for a few days, even though she knew you were busy." Dad looked at me, his eyes tormented. "I didn't confront her. And that was my mistake." When I heard those words, I didn't feel angry. I felt relieved, as if someone had finally confirmed that I wasn't imagining things. "Why is Sarah so angry with me?" I asked. Dad was silent for a long moment. "I think because the divorce affected her more deeply than we thought. She was 19, a grown-up, but she wasn't. The world she thought was solid suddenly shattered. You were more flexible. You could stay in touch with both of us. She couldn't. She felt that loyalty meant choosing sides. And I let her, because facing it meant admitting how much I had failed her." Hearing this, I saw a part of Sarah no longer feel like an enemy. I began to understand that the coldness, the control, the psychological attacks were not just directed at me. They were the product of an untouched pain. "What now?" I asked softly. Dad exhaled, as if he were unburdening himself. "Now we'll rebuild, but with clearer boundaries." He looked at me, his voice steady. "I talked to Sarah this morning. It wasn't an easy conversation. Tears, resistance, lots of reasons. But then she admitted it. She was angry. Angry at you, angry at me, angry at the situation. It was a start. We crumbled the crackers together for the fish like we had done so many times before. The gentle sound of the water and the snapping of the fish made a peaceful soundtrack to the quiet morning. Dad turned to me, his eyes soft and steady. No matter where you are, whether you come home often or not, you'll always be my daughter. My family. That's never changed. But I should have made that clear a long time ago. I should have stood up for you, been stronger. I looked down at the water, where the breadcrumbs dissolved in the small waves. Sometimes I tell myself that if I weren't there, I wouldn't matter anymore. Dad shook his head firmly. That was never true, and it's not true anymore. That morning, a text message from Diane popped up on my screen. Coffee at Elmhurst Brew 10. Just the two of us. I quickly typed out my agreement, and when I got there, she was sitting at the corner table, her eyes expectant but soft. There was no beating around the bush. "I'm sorry I was quiet last night," she said as I pulled up my chair. "I saw Sarah leave you out of things for years, but I told myself I shouldn't interfere." "My situation is difficult," I tried to soothe. "That may be true," she replied, her voice low but firm. "But that's no excuse when you're hurting." I was taken aback by her unusual candor. "Your father and I talked this morning," she continued. "We're going to change. Things are going to be different from now on." We put the heavy subject aside and moved on to lighter things. Her new herb garden, her unfinished photography project, the novel we were both reading. Gone was the defensiveness. Gone was the lingering tension of the parties. Just a simple ease with the way two women should talk. That afternoon, my mother called. Her voice was reserved. "Before you fly back to Portland, do you have time to have lunch with me?" I agreed. We chose a small diner in downtown Elmhurst, which had been my favorite bakery as a child. There was a long silence as we sat down until the waiter brought us our drinks. "I didn't handle last night well," Mom said finally, adjusting her knife on her napkin as if for support. "And not just last night, for years." She took a deep breath. "After the divorce, it was easier for me to think in simple terms. Your dad was the bad guy, Diane was the other guy, and Sarah was on my side. I let that story run because it made things less complicated." For the first time in years, she looked me straight in the eye. "You didn't choose sides, and I felt betrayed." "I just wanted to love my family," I replied, my voice not blaming but matter of fact. "I understand. Maybe I understood then. But I let sadness and anger cloud everything." She reached across the table, hesitated for a moment, then touched my hand lightly. "I let Sarah's resentment grow because it reflected my own unresolved feelings. But that wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to Sarah." That admission, from someone who had always seemed to be on my side, was something I never expected but more necessary than ever. One lunch couldn't erase years of hurt and distance, but it laid the first brick of a relationship that could be rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and compassion. The text came at 9 o'clock that evening, as I was packing my suitcase for my flight tomorrow morning. It was from Sarah. "I think we should talk before you leave. Liam and Emma are both asleep. Can you come to the hotel for a bit?" An hour later, we were sitting across from each other in the Holiday Inn lobby. The soft blue fabric and soft yellow lighting cast a heavy silence between us, now almost strangers. Sarah looked different. No longer her usual neat and confident self. Her hair was tied back. She wore no makeup, her cardigan was slightly wrinkled at the sleeves, and her shoulders were hunched as if she were carrying something heavy. "I can't apologize for everything," she began, her voice slow and unguarded. "I'm still trying to figure out what happened last night and this morning with Dad." "I know," I said, "and I appreciate you telling me the truth." I looked her straight in the eye. "But I also need to tell you about the side table last night. It wasn't just an accident." I paused, then continued. "I knew it would hurt you, And I did it on purpose. Sarah took a deep breath, nodding, as if she had been prepared for this. Ethan told me a few weeks ago that it was petty and cruel, that it wasn't the sister he believed I could be. She leaned forward, her eyes not wavering. And he was right. I know that. We talked for nearly 2 hours, not to resolve everything. There was still so much left unsaid, but to acknowledge the irrevocable rift between us. The years of avoidance, misunderstanding, and jealousy had built into a silent wall that now at least had a name. I kept you out of the gatherings on purpose, Sarah admitted after a moment. From Labor Day last year to Thanksgiving. Not because I hated you, but because I wanted to keep the position I had. As the favorite daughter. You're coming back. It made me nervous. I was stunned. Not because the confession was so unexpected, but because the weariness in her voice told me this was no longer pure jealousy. It was fear of being replaced. Sarah looked down at their clasped hands. I think I've been mad at you for so long that I've forgotten how to be anyone else. I've forgotten how to be a sister. I leaned over and said softly, I can learn again. Not right away, but little by little. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes still skeptical, but not completely closed this time. She nodded slightly as if testing an old belief. We hugged before we parted, a hesitant, awkward hug, but real. No rush to forgive, no attempt to erase the past. Just a fragile commitment to call each other once a month. A small step, but an important one. Maybe the first step to starting over. Back in Portland, I found a therapist who specialized in family relationships and committed to weekly sessions. Gradually, I began to understand that I had contributed to that isolation by believing that living apart meant abandonment. That realization didn't justify Sarah's behavior, but it did help me see that I had accepted my marginal role as inevitable. My dad and I started having regular weekly FaceTime calls, no longer the scattered, bland phone conversations. He became more proactive about keeping me updated on family matters, no longer relying on Sarah to act as a conduit. I sensed a subtle but important change. For the first time in years, I was being treated as a real member of the family, not just someone who came and went. 7 months after the birthday dinner, I returned to Elmhurst for Labor Day. This time, I stayed at Diane and Dad's house, not a hotel. Sarah and I still kept a polite distance. But there were a few moments, brief but real, when friendliness flickered in her eyes and voice. The tension hadn't completely disappeared, but the overt coolness had been replaced by something like respect. Reserved, fragile, but real. But the biggest change wasn't in Sarah, or even Dad. It was in me. That birthday night, I stepped out of my role as an outsider and into my place. I no longer silently accepted my absence as fate. I no longer let distance define my closeness or my value to my family. I learned that family relationships are not set in stone. They are reshaped little by little, by actions, reactions, and sometimes very small choices. When I accepted isolation, I inadvertently maintained the patterns that had hurt me. But when I began to set boundaries, when I dared to speak my truth, I created a space, small, but enough for something healthier to emerge. Healing is not linear. Some wounds may never fully heal, but I believe there is a kind of growth that can only come from the cracks, where the flesh was once torn but where strength also grew. Now, I no longer doubt my place in the family. Belonging is not a gift given to us by others. It is something we earn, with the courage to say, I deserve to be here too. If you've ever felt left out, if you've ever wondered if you mattered enough to be heard, I hope this story lights a candle for you. Your worth isn't in how many times you appear in family photos. It's not in the area code you call home. It's in your decision to not participate in your own isolation. I wonder, have you ever faced family conflict? And if so, how did you overcome it? If you'd like, please share your story in the comments below. Maybe your journey will be a guiding light for someone else, just as mine helped me find my own path. Wherever you are, however far you have come, remember that you always deserve a place in your own family.